Yeah, so I found you on social media, and obviously, while you've never traveled overseas, it's amazing that what you do travels. Okay, so tell us like how that started. Where are you from? Who are you for people who don't know you? Yeah, give us an introduction.
All right, so I guess who I am is rather I just always say a child of the divine, that which some people choose to call God or the universe, however anyone chooses to define it. But yeah, I'm a source of that creative energy that has created us all. And then what I do or where I come from is I grew up in Polokwane, in Limpopo, and I was born in Venda. Yeah, but I really most of my teenage and primary school life I was in Venda, I mean Polokwane rather, and yeah, now I'm in the Johannesburg, Johannesburg, and I'm just kind of I guess I'm positioned here so that I can do more of this work because I think Johannesburg is really just a hub of a lot of activity. And if you really want to impact just any space, it's a good place to start. So I'm in Johannesburg, and what I do in Johannesburg is um, I'm a neurolinguistics programming practitioner, which just means that I understand how the mind works, and therefore I'm able to help people create change in their lives through understanding their unconscious patterns, their unconscious limiting beliefs, their unconscious traumas that they've had far back in their memory and all of that. And yeah, so here I'm doing leadership coaching and just helping people create and change their lives through my company Yvette coaching and just through one-on-one coaching. So yeah, and I've also written a book, so therefore I guess that makes me a writer of sorts. So yeah.
I mean, before COVID happened, you were having like retreats, etc., etc. Hey, or I know because on your website that's something that you advertise as well. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So I actually haven't had like a physical retreat, but I've always had workshops because I was planning to do one of my healing retreats where a group of people go far away to just not even far, it just could be to a quiet space, preferably a lot of nature, a lot of trees, a lot of sunshine, all of that, and to just I guess go within, and then with the guidance of me and my coaching techniques and my team and so forth, just to get them to that place where they can heal and deal with some of the things that they want to deal with. So I've always had workshops that I do, which are mostly focused towards healing, because I think a lot of the times the people that I work with come in and they say, oh, I'm struggling with confidence in my job. I'm struggling with speaking up in the workplace. I'm struggling with boundaries. My boss is always on my neck. And these are things that people really find themselves having mental health challenges because they feel stuck and they can't help those. They feel like they can't do anything about those things. And you always find that, or at least I always find that when I work with these people, it always goes back to some sort of childhood experience. It always goes back to some sort of past experience whereby in their childhood they probably had parents who were hard on them or never allowed them to speak, and now therefore as an adult that's affecting how they function in relationships at work, in relationships with other people, in their personal lives, and in their business, how they make business decisions, how they handle conflict, how they deal with certain things. So my workshops are focused at the root, right? Because a lot of times you'll go to like a motivational workshop or a confidence workshop and you'll feel confident for like a while, and then something else will happen and then you find yourself feeling like you're back at the same space. So my workshops are really just designed to help people, whether they come in with a goal of improving their business or even starting a business or improving their relationships at work or just building confidence or just being a better mom or really anything. My workshops are focused at finding the real root of why they may not be able to do those things, and then removing those limiting things, beliefs, thoughts, experiences, and releasing some of those experiences and allowing them to therefore now create reality as their true authentic self. I sound like such a old person because everything is like reality, authenticity, alignment. But yeah, that's basically what it is.
That's very much the language that I also speak as well. So I totally understand it and I totally get where you're coming from and really appreciate that there are, I think in today's world, and I want to say in the last few years, people are more, how do I say, because of social media, people are more aware of and open to the concepts of doing the work. You know, the work means if you need to get to the root of the issue, whatever it is, to become a better person, to sort out your character issues, whatever it is, to kind of process reality, then you need to do the work. And sometimes doing the work kind of, you have to dig in real deep for that. I love everything that you're saying. I love that you even mentioned the root issue, because this show, or at least these series of interviews, is about the roots and getting to the root of something a little bit different. But we're going to take a different turn in your interview. Previously, we've spoken to people about root issues with natural hair in different industries of society, you know, and then not only industry, just in different sectors, you know, environments. Natural hair woes in the schooling environments, in the public environment, you know, or in the beauty industry, all of those things. But today I specifically actually wanted to speak to you about just wellness as a person of color. I really find it really interesting. And I know for me also, maybe if we can speak a little bit about this and then we can move on to something else. For me, the first time I did a big chop or something, you know, to my hair, this was more than 10 years ago, it was a hugely psychological thing. I took months to get over the fact that I cut my hair, didn't feel like a female. You know, it was like, I'm not pretty enough. It's there's huge things that we attach to our hair. And then psychologically, also as a people of color, for me, of color means, you know, just not being white. A lot of seeking help and treatment, and psychologically, traditionally, this is not something that we speak about in our homes. So you attach a lot of feeling and meaning to your hair or different things that happen in your life. And traditionally, we wouldn't understand because we don't speak about, you know, self-care and, I don't know, understanding the psychological aspects behind everything. Can you talk about, or I mean, I want to go on a little bit more in this conversation and maybe speak about, have you seen this in your work where traditionally, this is, for example, just something that affected me and it has to do with my hair psychologically, but in terms of traditionally people of color, what is our response to the type of coaching that you do? I find it really rare and I find it very exciting because I feel like there's a huge space and your voice needs to be heard. But tell us a little bit more about what the approach has been, what's people's general reaction, what's our thought, our mindset towards what you do. Yeah.
Right. So I guess it's interesting that we also have this narrative that traditionally we don't seek help as Africans or people of color. And I can speak for specifically for, I suppose, people of color who come from Africa, Black people specifically. If you look at our history, right, we've always had systems. So we always have to start again at the roots because we still live in a space where our narrative has been created by the media, by, what do you call this, colonization, by different things. So we have to go back and say, okay, wait up. Given this narrative that we don't seek help, when did that start? Because in our African culture, right, we have sangomas. Those people are healing therapists, right? You go there and you talk about what you're experiencing. Somebody guides you through solutions. And those solutions, I think, also have been created, and there's been a negative connotation around those solutions as well through colonization and African culture being demonized. That's the truth of it. It's been demonized. And we canceled so many things out of our culture, from the rituals that bring you into femininity, to the rituals that guide you through manhood, to the rituals that, and there's so much of it that has lost. And some of it is our own fault as Africans, to be honest, you know, and some of it is the fault of colonization and, because we also have continuously, after we've been taught these narratives, then rejected our own. So I think we should also just investigate before we even say, oh, we don't do this as Africans, we don't do this as people of color. Let's step back, and say, okay, this process of going to a traditional healer, right, to consult about you not having peace, what do we call that process? Because that sounds like a process of healing to me, and that person says, you know what, go and do this ritual, which will bring you at peace with your father. That sounds like something that brings, and just because we don't always understand those rituals doesn't mean that we get to demonize them and say they are wrong and say this is not a means of therapy, because I have friends that have journeyed through that route. And part of it, again, with this conversation around healing as people of color, is that people reject these processes, because I know so many people who have maybe a calling to be a sangoma again, and they, because of so many teachings, different religious teachings, and they reject those notions, and they reject themselves, because there must be something wrong with me if I have this type of gift. There must be, and that in itself is a rejection of self. And you can't have peace in your life if you're rejecting yourself, if you're rejecting your gift, if you're rejecting what you've been called into. So part of the healing, I guess, as we are having this conversation, is to really investigate, okay, do we as people of color really not have any rituals? And why did we kind of push away those rituals that contributed to our peace, that allowed us to communicate? Because if you look at African culture, is we don't live in isolation. Everybody helps each other. And if you look at the contributions towards a lot of mental health issues, is lack of support, lack of guidance, not being able to talk about your feelings. We have entire rituals and cultures around when you're getting married. This is the process, and somebody advising you, guiding you. Then we go into Western knowledge and it says mentorship, and you're like, oh, that's a new concept. No, it's not. Right? So there's so many teachings that we need to really just investigate and go back into and look into and say, okay, is this really the first time we are hearing this as Africans? Because remember, part of the oppression as Africans and people of color is to make us think that everything we're experiencing is new. Meanwhile, a lot of inventions, a lot of things, meanwhile, a lot of things that are being implemented now, like there's so many things like yoga, Reiki, this and that, and it's like, oh, these are new concepts, but really when you investigate, a lot of things originate in Africa. And that's the first part. Right? So that was an introduction to everything. And then I think you asked the question about, you said something about natural hair, I suppose. And you can correct me so that I do answer. Yes, what were you saying about natural hair? Just so that, just to bring my thoughts back.
More just an embracing of self. And I love what you're saying. I think what I hear you saying is that we have everything within ourselves, especially as a culture, as a people, but we've rejected it because of colonization, because of westernization, and just general our history in general. And I think part of that rejection is how we look. The rejection of self and how we look. And I guess the natural hair ties into that. And as a culture, as a people, within our, with just throughout the African diaspora, hair has been a huge thing traditionally that we've been called to reject traditionally as well. Because of, so I think, you've kind of answered my second question in the first one in saying, but I loved how you broke that down. It's like, there's not to say that we do not have therapy in our culture just because it doesn't look the same way, I absolutely love that. So how did you hear your call?
I guess for me, I've always been spiritual, and that has evolved differently as I've grown, right? Because I think the things that we believe, think, even if you belong to a particular religion, that verse that you read as a child changes as you grow older, and you're like, oh, I don't see it this way, I don't see it that way. So for me, I've always had a relationship with the divine, and to have a relationship with the divine, you need to have a relationship with yourself, because a lot of times, that I think that part that is divine lives within us. And because of the experiences that I had in my childhood, growing up, etc., I tapped into self a lot. And for me, I think it's always been a natural journey. It's not something that, when I've noticed that when I speak to people, they're like, wow, Yvette, I'm like, no, this is how I live inside my head consistently all the time. But for me, the biggest decision that I made for myself is what's important is my relationship with the divine and my relationship with self. Anybody else's thoughts, opinions do not matter. And I think that has freed me and allowed me to evolve in my journey. And that's basically how I stepped into my call. It's just been a natural progression of things, from doing, like, enjoying helping people. And then one day hearing about NLP and also coaching. And I'm like, oh, that sounds like something I can do. And then I listened to that inner voice that said, oh, that sometimes sounds like something you should enjoy, you would enjoy, and it is something that resonates with you. And then I followed that feeling. And then from there on, it's just been that. Like, writing my first book wasn't a thing that I thought about for 10 years. It was just, oh, that sounds like something I can do. And then I listened to that feeling and I did it. And I really just honored myself in the desire to create, the desire to help people, the desire to learn and to grow. And that has manifested in me being where I am now and doing what I do, which is helping others, essentially. So I think how I got into my calling was listening to what I enjoy, what I love, what makes me feel good. Because I think we've been programmed to think that, oh, what you do mustn't be something that you enjoy, you know, like if you're suffering in your job, that is the thing that you must be doing. We've also been taught to really just ignore what we enjoy, what we love. And that comes a lot from how we're raised. Like, again, it goes back to our parents operating from a space of trauma, like, again, as people of color, South Africans specifically, because they operated from a space of need and fear. And fear that there won't be providence, fear that there won't be, things are going to run out, fear that like our futures will look like how their reality looked. And when you operate from that space, you just think you need to get an education, you need to get this job, you need to do this. You know, you don't think, okay, what do you actually enjoy? Because there's no room for feelings when you're operating from a space of trauma. So our parents really operated from that space of trauma. And part of healing us and them is really just starting to tap into our feelings and what we enjoy, what we love, what makes us uncomfortable. Because again, from a South African context, apartheid was the system that taught you to tolerate what makes you uncomfortable. And part of what was you were programmed to think was uncomfortable is your being, which is just so messed up. It's like you in your black skin, in your nappy hair, in your a darker skin tone, you know, or brown yellow skin tone, in your just everything about, in your culture, in your beliefs, in your thoughts about yourself. Like, if you listen to teachings of Steve Biko and the court case, I was shocked when I was listening to the court case. I'm like, all he said was black is beautiful, and the man literally said through a court case because of that. So that is like a shocking reality, to say that all he was saying is that black is worthy. And they're like, okay, but why? And it's like, you have to justify your worthiness. And goes back to the hair thing.
It's mind-boggling, actually.
It really goes back to the hair thing, and just how we feel and think about ourselves and the battles we're still facing. I mean, Steve Biko passed on a long time ago.
There's little pieces of what you said that I really love and I so resonate with, right? Because I think for me, I've generally kind of like lived on this path that I really feel like for me, have a connection with God and a connection with myself, but that happened through being alone for a lot of my childhood as well. So like sitting with self for a long period of time, and then not being afraid of being alone, and you start to listen to your thoughts and you are more aware, and the more you listen to it, that voice is stronger, and the more you have faith to trust that voice. So for me, I actually wanted to speak to you about like how your childhood was, because not everyone has that opportunity. And I think for me, again, my parents, for example, my dad he trained as a fine artist during apartheid, very amazing, was called to go to Germany, but then didn't leave, kind of took on teaching, you know, the normal. And when I left school and I'm like, Dad, I want to do fine art, he's like, no, because black people don't make money selling art. You know, I'm not going to pay for you doing any art. And I think I generally just pushed to do what I felt. And eventually, because doors opened for me, as I did stuff that I felt, my parents have now, I mean, it's like years and years and years later, but they've now kind of like understood that like it's okay. But like you say, our parents are acting from places of trauma. what childhood did you have that allowed you the space to identify with self? And how do other people who didn't grow up like you or have that same journey, especially people of color, now kind of start on that journey?
So my childhood was really, I guess I also spent a lot of time with self. And my childhood was, I think now for me, because I made peace with it, but I think there was a lot of trauma. There was a lot of rejection. So for me, I really didn't grow up with my dad in the same household. And just I also experienced abuse, and I also experienced just feeling like I'm not loved, feeling. So this physical abuse, emotional abuse, all of that. So in that, again, that's when I learned to tap into self, and I made these decisions, and I had these conversations with God, and also being an introvert, which I now understand later on in life because I have the language. So being an introvert, I think, contributed a lot, because I really just would be that kid with a book somewhere in a closet, and or that kid who goes to a museum on my own because I saw it while walking back from school and I just decided to pop in. So that's really the kind of person I was.
Oh no, we broke up.
Don't know if you can
We
hear
broke
me.
up for a
Are you
little
back?
bit. Yes, yes. I love that. That was just the person I was. I think that was your last line that I heard.
Oh yeah. So what was the second part of your question? I think
Yes, like you obviously were in your head. I love that you. So leading on to the second part of the question is, how can people kind of get to that self-awareness or relationship with self, especially people of color? You obviously didn't have a perfect childhood, but you made mental decisions. You were speaking to yourself. Sounds very much like me. Like I would say the same things to other people. Like I started doing something when I said it to myself. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm going to live like this, or I'm going to think like this, or so how can people, especially us of color who come from crazy backgrounds, how do we start on this wellness journey?
I think you just have to start eliminating the voices that were hard on you, and then start finding your own voice, because a lot of times we think the voices of other people are our own voice. So you'd have this voice that says you're not good enough, you have this voice that says you're not gonna ever achieve anything. You have a voice, it could be in small things, it could be small fears like, ah, don't, it's not okay for you to be on your own, just from observing how maybe your parents chose to exist. It could be a thing of you do not matter. It could be, so there's all these thoughts that we think are ours, and I think the first step is to identify which thoughts are yours and which ones are not, because you carry so much of other people's thoughts as your own in your journey. And when you get things wrong later on in life, when you're trying to find yourself, those voices ring loudly in your head. So start distinguishing it and start questioning the thoughts that come up. So I guess that would be the first tip. Question the thoughts. Just because it comes up doesn't mean it's yours and doesn't mean it's real, and say, okay, is there evidence of this thing that I'm believing about myself and about the world?
Yeah.
Is there evidence that proves this thing otherwise? What other thoughts can I choose about myself, and what can I choose to believe? So I'd say it would be that. And yeah, I guess the other thing is just being intentional. Like, our journeys with self, I always say, pursue yourself as wildly as you desire to be pursued. And I think even as a woman, we are taught to wait to be pursued. But it's like, have you pursued yourself? Have you taken time to get to know yourself? What do you like? What do you enjoy? And you can only do that by sitting down and having these conversations with self. And I think so many times when you talk to yourself, people are like, snap out of it. Or, and for me, I'm an audible thinker, which is also another thing that we need to learn, just that some people process information by saying them out loud. I'm one of those people. I need to hear it to process it. And if I'm not processing it out loud, it's difficult for me. So I definitely talk to myself quite a bit. That's how I make decisions. And that's just how my brain is positioned.
Like it's literally floating in your head this whole time, but when you speak it out, you're like, I've been thinking about this and this makes sense. As you saying it,
Relatable content. So yeah, I think just being intentional about spending time with self, get to know yourself. Like if you're a woman specifically, or even a man, the only way you can filter out other people's ideas of who you are is if you spend time with yourself. Because sometimes, we grow up, and I think a lot of my growth years happened when I moved away. So when you're in your parents' household, you always show up as your parents' child. When you're around certain friends that you've been friends with since like primary school, you don't even know what your own energy is because you're constantly immersed with the energy of others. So sometimes it's good to just strip yourself naked and remain with yourself, and that you do by going on dates with yourself, by just sitting and listening with yourself. That doesn't mean that you have to leave the house, but it just means that maybe sometimes just sit and be intentional. Whether you're married, whether you're in a relationship or not, it's good to just find self. And I think the other thing is that, I guess, yeah, leaving room for unlearning, right? Because there's so many things. And I guess question the behavior, question the pattern.
yeah.
If you have a pattern in your life that shows maybe certain relationships working out a certain way, employment patterns, how certain people treat you in the workspace. If there's a pattern, then there's something there that you can learn. So observe the pattern, and we all have some sort of pattern. We have anger patterns, we have relationship patterns, we have work patterns, we have business patterns, and question the pattern and see, is there something that this pattern is trying to bring to my awareness? A lot of the healing that I've gone through my own journey is observing my own patterns and taking responsibility. And growing up, we don't have a say sometimes in okay, well, if you're going to be spiritual about it, everybody has a say because you kind of choose the family and home you're born into, fortunately or whatever. So I believe personally that I chose my parents, I chose the environment I grew up in so that I can fulfill my purpose that I'm in now. So if I didn't have the background that I had, I honestly probably might not have even cared as much about helping people. So I do believe that we choose our paths. My mom always jokes about how I looked at her fashion sense and I was like, that is the lady I want to pop up through. So for me, I think as people, you get to a certain point where your parents did the best that they could with what they knew. And sometimes what they knew is just trauma, and what they knew is hurt. So now you as an adult, from the point that you have an awareness can happen when you're 15, 16, you might not have all the resources to change some of the things, but you definitely have an awareness. And once you have that awareness that this reality is not the one that I want to continuously experience. It's not the one that I want my kids to experience. And it's not the one that I want to live in. And you say, okay, what reality do I want to create for myself? And then start to change those things. So awareness and responsibility over our narrative is very important in saying, you know what, this is what life looks like for me. These are the new decisions I'm making. These are the new beliefs I'm choosing to take on in my journey. And these are the new patterns I'm choosing to create. And then going and doing the work, meaning research, YouTube, read books, online. There are free resources out there, so many of them. So actually, even this idea that we don't have resources, I mean, just by the click of a button, you can go and learn and read a whole book. When I didn't have money in my account, I used to go on YouTube and listen to books. That's how I used to, do a lot of my inner work. I used to be like, oh, I can't really go and buy this book right now. So I'm going to go on YouTube and I'm going to try and see if it's already there. Somebody maybe recorded it or did a reading or did something so that I can learn. So when we change our minds about what is available to us, that's when we open the universe, the world, to an abundance of healing and changing the way our lives look.
I really love that so much. And I think like out of everything, it's like interrogate all the thoughts, interrogate them, interrogate reality. I love that. It's like, what does my reality look like now? What do I want it to look like? And I also, it's things for me as well. It's like things that I just don't want to accept. This reality shouldn't be like this. And maybe it is like that for a lot of people, but I don't want to accept it as my own, So yeah, I think there's so much work to be done and we need you in this space. I love your message of like resources are available. And I think it's your perspective, like, hey, I'm going to go out and do the work. I'm going to find the answers that I need. And I find that those answers come to you Really, they do. If you're searching, they come.
Mm.
I thank you so much for speaking to us. I'm so grateful for that, Yvette. Please, if you could leave us with just one, maybe one nugget, something that you've found has been impactful for the last month, let's just say it. I just want to say,
Oh, the pressure.
I went to dinner with friends last night and I was talking to them about gaslighting, and then you posted it last night, and I tagged them, and I was like, "See, yeah,
I think one thing that stood out for me, English out the window. Anyway, stood out for me has been just grace for yourself in the journey. I mean, healing and unlearning is a process. And when we are hard on ourselves, we don't get to heal, because that space that we're supposed to be healing and learning, we're beating ourselves up. So I would say just understand that healing is a journey. It really is. You take it one step at a time, and sometimes you have these experiences that throw you back. But if they're throwing you back, there's something that you can learn from that experience. So go back, but go back with the intention, and ask yourself the right questions and say, what can I learn from this? What is my soul trying to bring to my awareness? What is God trying to bring to my awareness? What is God or the universe trying to, or my higher self, or what can I learn from this experience? And I think that's when you start to evolve, and everything that happens in your journey happens for you and not necessarily to you. So I think just kindness to self. Like, if anything, in the past month, I have had to be so kind to myself, and that is the thing that gets me through. And just honoring my emotions. We also tend to do this thing where we push away the sadness, and we're like, oh, I shouldn't be sad. I
allow
shouldn't be
yourself.
having this fear. It's just like, honor that sadness, be in it, feel it, express it, and release it. So that's my last word, I
Oh,
suppose.
love it. I love it. Thank you so much. Really,
Thank you, Eden.
really appreciate you. We'll be in touch just about when this will go online, etc. But this was really insightful and was awesome to speak to you. And I wish you all of the best going forward. Really.
Thank you for having me. This was an easy conversation. I like easy conversations. And thank you for your energy and what you bring to the table. Definitely very pure, and for your intentions as well, to just to have this conversation, to create the platform, and just to contribute to the collective consciousness of all of us. So thank you for having me and for the platform.